It's a blustery, chilly October day here at Bodega Head in Sonoma County, California. In this video, I'm working on an acrylic plein air painting of the Pacific Cliffs right off of the mouth of Bodega Bay. The conditions are challenging today, but I'm up for it and I'm excited to get painting. Hello, love, welcome. My name is Jennifer Laurel Keller. I'm an acrylic and mixed media artist and instructor, and this is the Wild at Art Show. If you're excited about today's painting session at Bodega Head, hit the like button and be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see how it turns out. Okay, I have a tinted canvas panel. This one is 11 by 14, just like all of the canvas panels I've been working on lately. And I'm going through and sketching out the composition. This is a piece of the coast where the cliffs are jutting into the ocean, and there's a lot of fog. There are a lot of waves crashing. The air is quite chilly and windy, and my hand is even getting cold as we speak, just this far into the painting. So I am just doing this loose sketch and making some adjustments so that I'm comfortable before I start laying down more color. Okay, now I'm using a dark purple. This is a dioxazine purple, and I think I might have mixed a little bit of Payne's gray into it. And this is going to be my shadow color. Now, this composition was interesting because of the fog, and there were not as many profoundly dark darks in this scene because of the fog. So I'm using these layers with these rocks to convey a lighter shadow color up at the top or further back in the composition. And then on the next two areas of rocks, I'm going to call them tiers of rocks coming out. Tier 1 will be at the top, tier 2 in the middle, tier 3 in the foreground, just for the sake of talking about it during the video. So there were different elements at play. There was the water making the rocks darker. There was on tier 3, which is in the foreground, it wasn't as immersed in water. It was more on land, so that was not as wet, but it was closer, so I could see more of the shadows through the fog. Okay, now I am putting in the water. You actually can't see the horizon. Even if it wasn't foggy, you wouldn't be able to see the horizon in this composition because of the angle that I'm looking down onto these rocks. It was pretty high up vista point, so all of the area in the background is just water. The ocean gets more colorful as it comes up to the front, and then I'm adding my sand in just to mark where that sand is, and that color is a combination of white, yellow oxide, Payne's gray, and burnt sienna. And then I mixed my sand color with a little bit of the blue from the ocean, and I'm just mixing more of that blue color from the ocean in little increments, so I get a gradation from the ocean to the sand, and that is indicating that the water is getting more shallow and that we can start to see through the water to the sand below. Okay, now I'm taking that sand color and bringing it into the face of this front cliff, and this cliff was very light, and it's hard to see because my canvas is blocking it, but there's a face on this cliff that just has a lot of sand color in it. It's probably a sandstone, gritty cliff face that is coming down. The second one has more of the yellow oxide in it, so I want warmth coming through the fog, but to be a little bit more subdued because the fog is there. And that is what is going to give it that misty look. Okay, now I'm coming in with more grays. I will say what a challenging scene, because not only was it, were there so many weather conditions, but the rock itself changed a lot. There was dark rock, very light and sandy rock, grays, dark grays, and then the fog. So I had to make the most sense of it that I could for the sake of the painting, not just how it looked in real life. Okay, so now I'm coming in with a darker gray, and I'm coming over the purples and lavenders to create a little bit of form and texture on the rocks. And that is really what this painting is all about, getting the rocks to the right texture and value and color. So I'm just going over the shadows. They've dried at this point, but barely, because it was wet and there was a lot of moisture in the air. And I have to go back and forth. There were times where the shadows were too dark to begin with, so I brought them up in value or up in light. And then I noticed sometimes that the shadows were too light and I had to bring them down a little bit. It's all about making adjustments to what is relative in the composition. I want certain parts of the painting to make sense in comparison to what is around that element in the piece. I want it to make sense in the surroundings way more than I want it to replicate the scene that I'm looking at. The painting is really what's important here. So just leaving a little bit of the shadow color showing through in the cracks of the rock, dappling in the texture. Some people call this scumbling, and it sounds like stumbling, but with a SC. And that's that movement that I'm making with the brush. It's kind of like scribbling, but a little bit shorter of a brush stroke. So I'm scumbling along, getting the contour of the rocks right. I want to go in the direction of the topography of the area. I want to give the impression of the slope of the rock and the texture. And now I'm bringing up more highlights in the background. Not because the weather or the light was changing very much. With these overcast days, the light changes very little, because it's kind of like being at, imagine a photography studio where there is diffused light. You're going to get really good definition, details, all of that, but the movement of the light and the sun are going to be less apparent throughout the day, which is why I like painting when it is overcast. I don't so much like painting when it is windy. That can cause a lot of tension on the canvas as it sits on the easel. It can be an issue with your things blowing away or your paint drying really fast, but in misty conditions, the drying time is still quite long for acrylics. Okay, now I'm adding some more warmth into my rocks. I've added more burnt sienna to the grays that I'm using. So it's not like a reddish brown warmth, but it is mixed in. And so the grays that I'm using become a little bit more of a warm beige. And I just go back and forth between my tones, my mid-tone, my highlights, my shadows. Getting that happy feeling where it just sits right, it feels right in my gut. And yeah, the most interesting color patterns, what is normally light was kind of dark, as far as where it's sat in the height of the cliffs. I'm used to, it's dark at the bottom, then it gets a mid-tone in the middle of a cliff, and then it's light on top, unless there's foliage. But the layers of the rocks were so different than many places that I've been painting lately. It's very unique, this location. Okay, so even though the rock was quite light in the foreground, I needed to make sense of it for the painting. So I came through and worked on this area a little bit. Now I'm using a medium gray, and I have the foreground shaping up, but it's almost getting lost a little bit. So I have to stick with this. Okay, let's work on that little rock. I always like adding a little rock to the composition as almost like punctuation. It keeps the eye from just going off the edge of the canvas. All right, working away here, getting my medium dark colors looking good. And you can see how in the actual landscape behind the easel, the fog has lifted just a little bit. It's not quite as light as it was when I started. And so that is another thing that changes when you're on a very weathery day. That fog loves to roll in and out and in and out and keep you on your toes. Okay, so this little area here needed some depth, so I am adding more shadow and making sure that the shadows really speak to the form of the rocks, because with light and shadow comes form, and that's when things appear three-dimensional. That's when it starts to pop off of the page. So you've got to have some shadow in there. Even if something is quite light, you got to pay attention to the shapes of your shadow. Okay, and then I like to come back over the shadow with a medium tone so that the shapes are rounded out to that form. And I needed to add some more color to the grays just for the sake of the painting to give it a little vavoom. There was a sandy color. Sometimes it got a little bit more red. Sometimes it was more yellow, but I pushed the colors a little bit further than they actually were in real life so that the piece had that painterly feel. Anyone can replicate a color, or I don't know, not everyone can. If you know what you're doing, it's easy to replicate a color, but to translate a color to what people want to see or what they didn't know they wanted to see, but they always like it, just a little bit extra color saturation is going to go a long way when it comes to your audience and your own fun. Okay, so bringing in highlights again. The highlights here are not going to be that high because it is a more subdued, overcast day. Now I'm bringing in a little bit of that debris that's on the beach. And then I'm going to run the sand color through it again just to break it up a little bit. So I'm bringing more depth into the sand by doing a similar sand color, letting some of the sand color from before show through, and then running the brush through those darker marks just to give a hint of something going on the sand. But it doesn't have to be detail. I don't want to paint each individual piece of seaweed that washed ashore. It's just a hint because that's how I paint. I just like to have it be a little bit more impressionistic. Now for the sea foam, and if you've been watching my videos lately, you know I love a good application of sea foam because it just makes the texture of the water pop. The white of the sea foam stands out. It gives the painting more light, more bright components, and the texture is really fun. And then here's a little bit of foam trailing out to sea. Like I said, that's not the sky behind that piece of rock. It's more ocean. So, I want to give the impression of all of that foam churning up and then trailing away back into the distance, which gives it a sense of depth. Okay, I left a little bit of the ocean open so that I could pop a wave over that. And I'm coming in with a brighter white and put a little curl on that wave there. Just a hint. It's not, these aren't big surfing waves, right? They're just moderate size, nice curling waves. I guess you could surf on these if they weren't coming into the rocks like this. But yeah. Okay, now I'm coming through with a little bit of highlights, just kind of kissing the top of these rock formations, wanting to give it the right kind of slope and light. Not too much in the background, more highlights in the foreground. There in the foreground, we see the most of the highlights and the shadows. And then as you go back in distance, it kind of dissipates and you get more of a mid-tone. So I think I'm done. That is the piece. And it's interesting. I made it. It was a windy day. I feel like I could just fly away with this wind, especially around like 3 o'clock. It picks up. But here we are. So I do teach a class online called Plein Like a Pro. It's on Skillshare. I hope you will check that out in the links below, along with this painting, which is in my online shop currently. So you can have this in your home if you like. And there are plenty more paintings to browse as well. All right, that's it for today. Happy creating. Much love.